lucky chap again this morning. While my Zero DSR's in for a 16,000 mile service, I've been given this to ride. Oh yes, the new Zero SRS. So this is built on the SRF basics, with lower foot pegs, extended back seat. Bars are slightly shifted, obviously it's fared, that's the noticeable difference. And yes, it's a nice bike to ride. But would I have one? Well, let's see. Time for a look around the bike first, and the initial impressions are very positive. The bike certainly looks serious about being a full-size motorcycle. For me, the fairing is a positive improvement over the SRF, although I appreciate that everyone has their own preferences about how bikes look. I have to say though, I'm really not convinced about floating rear mudguards or fenders. The SRS is fitted with Showa 40mm suspension to the rear and 43mm forks on the front. Both front and rear have adjustable spring, preload, compression and rebound damping. Again, like the SRF, the battery sits where the engine would sit on a conventional motorbike. So while you gain the weight of a battery, you lose the weight of an engine. So to answer that perennial question, the handling is very similar to that on a conventional petrol-powered motorbike. Front and rear brakes are by J. Juan, or Jota Juan since they're Spanish, or J. Juan if you must, with twin discs on the front and single disc on the rear. And as with the SRF, having lost the space normally taken up by a petrol tank, what better thing to do than to turn that space into a handy storage area, accessible by a lock on the near side, or offside if you ride a bike in a right hand side country of course. This offers a reasonable amount of space for stowing things away. In this case, Streetbike had stowed the bike's 3-pin to Type 2 granny cable in the storage box. And yes, I'm pleased to report that thanks to the rubberized piping seal on the lid, you can easily pass a USB cable or similar underneath the lid and charge accessories on the front of the bike. The charge port is located again just towards the back of the tank area and just in front of the groinal area. The charge socket in Europe is the conventional Type 2 Menekes, which it's safe to say is the de facto standard for AC charging on electric vehicles in Europe. Now, as someone who enjoys touring, luggage options are important to me, and the SRS has an official SHAD 3-box option, although I'm led to believe that offerings by Givi and Kappa are likely to emerge later in the year. The SRS runs the same Cypher 3 operating system as the SRF, so it will be familiar to those already familiar with the SRF. And to make certain changes, the bike has to be in riding mode with the side stand up. Thusly, once the side stand is up, we can make changes to the riding mode using the mode switch on the left handlebar. Hold the switch in to change riding mode and then toggle left and right to select the preferred mode. The ride modes available are Eco, Street, Sport and Rain, with each mode affecting the bike's power delivery and regenerative braking levels based on throttle input. On the right handlebar we have the cruise control button, located where the start switch is on a conventional petrol bike. To engage cruise control mode, you hold the cruise control button for around half a second until the cruise control icon displays on the dash. Once in cruise control mode, to set the cruising speed, a short press on the cruise control button will hold the bike's speed until either of the brakes are engaged or the cruise control button is given a quick press again. A long hold on the cruise control button toggles cruise control mode off. The bike has 4 traction control modes: Street, Sport, Rain and Off. These can be set independently from the ride mode if required by holding the mode button to the right for around half a second and toggling through the options. Pressing the mode button confirms the mode change. A long hold to the left on the mode switch engages the heated grips settings on the premium version of the bike. The heated grips can be set to low, medium or high settings or turned off. And again, to confirm your choice, a simple press on the mode switch does the job. So that's the main control features of the bike covered. Time to get going again. Now I've left this bit of footage from the ride just to show how truly awful our roads can be. This is ordinarily a favourite stretch of road of mine, but on the day I filmed this it was in a pretty bad state. The surface showed considerable signs of damage, as is blindingly obvious, and it being March there were a lot of farm vehicles using the roads and leaving plenty of mud around. But who wants to see footage on a motorway? So apologies to you, dear viewer, and to my Trossachs for the state of the roads. Some of the footage is unfortunately more shaky than I would like. The surface didn't help on that score, but it didn't help that I'd brought an extended RAM mount part to allow the camera to clear the screen on the bike. While this did indeed clear the screen, it unfortunately left the camera prone to shake. To be fair, the camera looked far worse as I was riding along, and I thought the footage might be unusable at one point. But those boffins at Garmin do a pretty good job of image stabilisation. Once again for this ride, I'd chosen an established round trip route of around 90 miles, or 145 kilometres, from Halesowen near Birmingham out to Bridgnorth, from Bridgnorth to the beautiful town of Ludlow, and from Ludlow back to Halesowen. But as the road between Bridgnorth and Ludlow was in such poor condition on this occasion, compounded by a few rain showers and the mud deposited by farmers, let's skip that road footage and jump straight to some town riding in the Shropshire town of Ludlow. The SRS is perfectly happy riding around town. The bike, as with all other Zero bikes I've ridden, is nicely balanced, and it turns heads, as can be seen by this chap here. Yeah. Took a bit of interest there, did a little dance. Doonch, 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 doonch. Yeah, enough of that. This particular street is a good place to note how pedestrians do or don't respond to an electric vehicle. And it just so happened on this occasion that I was following a Tesla Model S P100. So this was clearly going to be carnage for the pedestrians of Ludlow. In all seriousness though, on my first longer test ride of a Zero back in 2016, I brought it here and I did have to be extra vigilant of pedestrians stepping out into the road, which they tend to do somewhere like this. That experience was the deciding factor in my choosing to fit a small bell to my DSR when I bought one. I did it mainly in jest, but in actual fact it can prove useful in this kind of scenario. Quite simply, it's just not as obnoxious as blasting a horn at someone. Of course, the reality is that pedestrians are going to pedestrian. The presence or lack of a noisy engine isn't going to prevent those determined to take themselves out of the gene pool from doing so. The nature of the road tells any sensible rider that, so extra vigilance is just required. Having stopped in the old market square, it seemed rude not to get some shots of the bike using 11th century Ludlow Castle as a backdrop, one of the first stone castles built in England following the Norman conquest of 1066. And, stepping off the bike again to take a look around it, I definitely like the side profile. The fairing really sets it off nicely. Slow riding the SRS I found once again to be straightforward, although there was something about the rear brake pedal that made it a little more tricky to naturally find with my right foot. It seemed to be somewhat more set into the body than on other Zero models, so that the ball of my foot didn't naturally make contact with it, and I had to point the front of my right foot further in than I'm used to. Otherwise, as with other electric motorbikes which lack a clutch, slow riding is all in the throttle and rear brake, as there is no clutch to feather. Weight-wise, the bike weighs in at 229 kilograms or 505 pounds on the standard edition, and 234 kilograms or 516 pounds on the premium edition. Whilst on the subject of weight, the carrying capacities for the standard and premium models are 225 kilograms and 220 kilograms respectively, or 495 versus 484 pounds in old money. As with any electric motorcycle, people wonder about the weight of the battery and how this may impact the balance of the bike. But they overlook the fact that in gaining a battery we've lost the weight of an engine and the fuel. In my experience, on the electric motorbikes I've ridden, there is little to tell between them in terms of weight distribution compared with petrol bikes. The exception here is the Energica SA9, which I found on first impressions to be a little bit more top heavy. Right, it's time for me to shut up for a few seconds so you can hear the sound of the bike riding in town. Yes, the old electric whine is present and as pleasant as ever for those of us who like the sound of an electric motor. Those who prefer their bike noises flatulent are simply not going to budge on their insistence that the noise of a motorbike is an intrinsic part of riding a motorbike. It may be for them, but they don't speak for the whole motorbiking community, any more than riders of sports bikes, adventure bikes or chopper riders speak for the entire motorcycling community. It's funny the sheer amount of vitriol some bikers hold towards electric motorbikes. I get that they don't like them, but I'm not sure why. When we took the SRS out of the store on the morning of this ride, there was an older biker who asked if it was electric. Yes, came the reply from one of the staff. The look of disdain the guy gave towards the bike was interesting and revealing. "It isn't a motorbike if it hasn't got a motor," he said through a sneer, while his mate chuckled. The street bike guy and I just looked at each other. But it does have a motor. It's okay, you know, you don't have to own one. I guess we'll put him down as unsure. I suspect some bikers don't get it, some bikers don't want to get it, and some bikers would rather hang up their biking boots than get it. Fine, it's their loss. Let's leave them to it and get back to the SRS. Out on the open road, the ride is a bit nicer than the SRF. It may be that the suspension was just set up slightly differently, but the SRS is a slightly more comfortable ride. As a rider used to having my mirrors positioned slightly higher up, it didn't take long for me to adjust to the mirrors being positioned so that the view is below the handlebars and rider's arms. Sports bike riders will no doubt find it second nature though. Seat height is 787mm or 31 inches unladen, i.e. without anyone sat on it. As to the riding position on the SRS, it naturally encourages a forward lean, but this is in no way an aggressive lean. It's not the kind of position which would make you uncomfortable, and the lowered foot pegs have helped in this regard. But the option is there to tuck in behind the windscreen, and Zero has made a sales point of claiming that highway range can be increased 13% by adopting a more tucked position. They are certainly right in this regard, in theory at least. Aerodynamics have been overlooked to date by Zero, and owners have in some cases fashioned their own fairings to extend the range of their bikes, in some cases going to quite extreme levels of streamlining. So, how about the range? Well, both the standard and premium edition have identical battery and motor, so the claimed mileages are 161 city miles, 82 highway miles, that's assuming 70 miles per hour, and 123 mixed road miles. That's 259, 175 and 198 kilometres respectively. And that's from the standard 14.4 kilowatt hour battery, of which 12.6 kilowatt hours is usable capacity. We'll come back to range at the end of this video. As with the SRF, range can be increased by adding a power tank, and charging time can be decreased by adding a charge tank. The power tank adds available battery capacity and the charge tank improves charging speed. Specifically, the power tank adds 3.6 kilowatt hours of capacity, which is an additional 25%, and the charge tank can increase charging speed by an optional 3 or 6 kilowatts. So, the SRS offers 3 kilowatts charging speed on the standard model and 6 kilowatts charging speed on the premium model. Okay, another short stop here at Clee Hill to appreciate the view out towards the Malvern Hills in the distance. And as a point of interest, looking east from here, the distant Malvern Hills are the highest ground between here and the Russian Urals. The charge tank is available in 3 kilowatt or 6 kilowatt versions, and so takes the charging speed up to a maximum 9 or 12 kilowatts respectively. However, the charge tank or power tank are mutually exclusive. Only one of them can be installed on the bike, and they live inside the storage or tank area. I'm assured that some space is still available for storage following installation of either of these. Whether you opt for a power tank or charge tank will depend entirely on your own circumstances. For me, as someone who has driven and ridden electric since 2014, I would opt for charging speed over capacity every time, and indeed while I was test riding the SRF last year, my Zero DSR was in the workshop to have a 6 kilowatt charge tank fitted. 6 kilowatt charging through the charge tank takes my DSR from 0 to 100% charge in 1 hour 45 minutes, compared to 9 hours with the standard 1.3 kilowatt onboard charger. I therefore expect a 6 kilowatt charge on the SRS to take 2 hours at 6 kilowatts on the premium model and double that on the standard 3 kilowatt model. Max out the premium to 12 kilowatts and you should be seeing a 1 hour charge, assuming you can find 12 kilowatt or higher AC chargers where you live. These won't typically be installed at home in the UK, as most domestic power supplies are single phase, so most domestic fast electric vehicle chargers max out at 7 kilowatts here on our 240 volt supply. However, 22 kilowatt and 11 kilowatt public AC chargers are not that uncommon, so maxing out to 12 kilowatt charging may be an attractive option to some owners. There are people, however, for whom a regular two-way commute might only be possible with a bit of extra range, and who don't have access to a charge point of any kind at work. In that case, I can see that a power tank may well make sense over a charge tank. They could charge at home overnight and commute to and from work without ever concerning themselves about charging anywhere outside home. For me though, as a keen tourer, I prefer to have less range but to be able to charge up as quickly as possible. So the charge tank is a more attractive proposition to me, which is why I had one fitted to my Zero DSR. Okay, a quick rundown of power information. A frequent question is the CC equivalent of electric motorcycles. That's not an easy question to answer, as there's no direct equivalent conversion between CC and electric motors. So, to quote the specifications, power-wise, the motor is again a passively air-cooled interior magnet AC motor, which produces 190 newton meters or 140 foot-pounds of peak torque and 82 kilowatts or 110 horsepower of peak power. Top speed is factory limited to 124 miles per hour, that's 200 kilometers per hour. Passive air cooling, as opposed to liquid cooling on both the motor and battery, means that electric vehicles can be prone to overheating. But any modern electric vehicle has dedicated battery management systems and drive systems which will protect the components from damage. Ultimately, the bike will protect itself and restrict power if a rider thrashes it too much. If range is low, the bike will also restrict power to conserve energy. Speaking of which, how did I do on this test ride? Well, I started with 101 miles on the odometer, with the battery at 100%, and finished on 188 miles with 7% battery left. So I covered 87 miles or 140 kilometers, riding normally and at legal speeds throughout. That comes in at around the 90 miles mark by my reckoning, which is pretty much the same as I achieved on the SRF. However, the SRF was ridden in the height of summer, whereas this ride was conducted with the temperature hovering at around 11 degrees Celsius or 52 Fahrenheit in March, and through a few rain showers for early parts of the journey. Lower temperatures and rain do affect range. I rode the bike predominantly in street mode, which keeps torque and regenerative braking levels somewhere in the middle. Eco mode gives you the heaviest level of regenerative braking and less torque, but still lays down sufficient power when required. Eco mode also restricts top speed to 75 miles per hour. That's 120 kilometers per hour. Sport mode is naturally the one everyone wants to try, and it's certainly fun to feel the bike give its all. But it's not the wisest mode to ride in, unless you're just doing short runs. Eco mode will definitely optimise the bike's range, and rain mode cuts torque and regenerative braking levels to maintain the best amount of traction. Finally, custom mode is probably the one most owners will ultimately use, as it provides for custom setting of torque and regenerative braking via the Zero app available for Android and iOS. So, back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video. Would the SRS work for me? The answer to that question is yes, and yet no. Yes, because it's a great bike in its own right. You have more than a decade of experience in Zero's development. If I were in the market for a new electric motorcycle, it would be a serious contender. And yet, no, because I already have a great electric motorbike, the Zero DSR. Once again, as with the SRF, this ride showed me that the realistic range under normal riding is not significantly higher than that of the DSR. The problem from Zero's perspective is that their bikes have been good for some time, and shifting existing owners to newer ones is really the preserve of those with the disposable income. In a strange way, when Zero announced that a 6 kilowatt charge tank could be retrofitted to my 2016 model DSR, that instantly removed the biggest reason to upgrade to an SRF or subsequently an SRS. I can achieve the same range on my DSR and I have the 6 kilowatt charge tank, so it's flexible enough to take further afield. I said at the end of my SRF test ride video that the next electric motorcycle I buy must have DC rapid charging, and I still lean towards that view. However, with the possible exception of the Energica SAS in 9, I'm currently a little underwhelmed at the DC options. Also, for those of us who aren't comfortable playing around with the innards of electric motorbikes, dealership support is important. And that brings me back to Streetbike in my case. They're a mere hour from my home and have been behind Zero and Zero owners from the outset, even when Zero pulled out of the UK market temporarily a few years ago. That's a serious consideration for me. They've been supportive throughout my ownership experience, good and bad, and I did have some early bad technical issues which they sorted without exception every time. There are new dealerships all over the UK now, and so it's becoming ever easier to find a Zero. But for my part, I'd like to thank Streetbike again for giving me the opportunity to test ride the SRS, and if you're anywhere around the Midlands and want to give the SRS a try, or any other of the Zero range, drop them a line and ask about a test ride. And that goes especially for you cynics too. I promise you'll be pleasantly surprised, even without the farty sounds. Thanks for watching and stay safe, especially if you're watching when this video goes out while we're all trying to avoid falling victim to the current pandemic. Hope to catch you soon.